Now, are you...
Credits to his name, including memorable roles in Cabaret, opposite Liza Minnelli, and the title character in the sci-fi classic Logan's Run. Our younger audience members may be more familiar with his character Basil Exposition in all three Austin Powers movies. His television works include The Fourth Saga, Great Expectations, and Curb Your Enthusiasm, among other shows. He's been a guest on The Simpsons and on the 100th episode of Law & Order: Criminal Intent. Among his Broadway credits are Someone Who Will Watch Over Me, the musical of The Little Prince, The Crucible, and the world premiere of Tennessee Williams' Outcry. Michael currently serves as chairman of the California Youth Theater. His lectures internationally on the history and art of acting, and he has been awarded Britain's OBE and a star on Hollywood Walk of Fame, among other honors. His books include an autobiography, Accidentally on Purpose, A Shakespearean Actor Prepares, and Are My Blinkers Showing? Adventures in Filmmaking in New Russia, published last fall. We recommend his next book be titled Every Other Year, An Actor's Experience with Chautauqua. It's a real pleasure to welcome you back. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michel York.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you all for inviting me back. Having heard what expectations are expected of me in this august platform, be that as it may, but hello, or perhaps hello, he lied. That was the title. Did you ever read it? Linda Ott's very entertaining book about the in fact, discussing another subject very close to my heart, the movies. Last time, we talked about Shakespeare, and I raised a few suggestions as to how he's best served in interpretation by actors and directors. Today, well, at least at the outset, I'd like the same hands-on approach to this, quote, flickering image that has been the subject of this week. The how more than the why, the practical, not so much the theoretical, the viewpoint of the practitioner, rather than that of the auteur, historian, or critic. Because of the enormity of this subject, I will of necessity have to narrow the focus somewhat. But first, some whys, and perhaps we'll find that answer as we progress. Is cinema, or the flicks, to adapt the week's evocative, if technically outdated, title, an important subject for discussion in this august forum? Well, I certainly hope so, because I've spent a good deal of my life engaged in it, and even earning a living from it, both on celluloid and by cathode ray. If it is important, why is it? And if it isn't, please explain the significance of this week's lectures. Why does it occupy so much of our time and attention? Because of the limitations of time, there are a few interesting subjects that I'd like to get into, but won't, unless we get to them in the Q&A. For example, the issue of censorship. Is it something best self-controlled by the artist, or by a representative of you, the audience? Do actors have the right to speak out on issues not pertaining to their craft? Indeed, the examination of the perversity of celebrity in today's PR-centric universe is worth a whole lecture in itself. But, as you've heard, some have greatness thrust upon them. I am the Chautauqua lecturer, and since I was informed, I haven't really slept well since. So anything I say cannot possibly match your expectations, but at least I hope some of the following observations will resonate. But thank you so much to the Andersons for their sponsorship. Now, growing up in England many decades ago before, oh, by the way, I was told never stand behind the podium. It's too lecturing. This was at dinner last night. Promenade. So, we all have something to learn, and it works too. Growing up in England many decades ago, before the intrusion of television, I was raised, as we all were then, in a film culture, going to the cinema on a regular basis. I was an ardent patron of the Saturday morning pictures, where for sixpence you could ride the range, visit strange planets, and vocally assist Sherlock Holmes and Dick Barton in their ceaseless quest against crime into extreme close-up. I discovered the National Film Theatre in London. This became my unofficial university. I saw films from every corner of the world, in every language and length, even Marcel Brutter's surrealist masterpiece, which I recommend. It's a film that is exactly 1 second long. And I must say that I've pined for this nostalgically as I've sat through some really butter-numbing But like the young Hamlet, I soon realized that there were more things in heaven and earth than had hitherto been dreamt of in my puny philosophy. I sensed that we were all united by a common visual language, a vocabulary of images that, though spoken with different accents and emphases, was basically the same. That's why I was, well, I have to say, somewhat taken aback to see in the Chautauqua program the cinema being described as this historical American art form. Although I hear that I heard you had some wonderful movies the other day from the Eastman House showing the very origins. I wish I'd been here. I began to have an inkling of the cinema in society in general, no longer perceiving it as an entertainment, but as a powerful force of enlightenment and of coercion. We were then in the middle of a Cold War, and I saw many Soviet movies. I wanted to find out why Lenin had deemed the cinema the most important of all the arts, and why Stalin, in Stalin's Kremlin, the most frequented and probably popular room was his screening room. Yet, alongside for its penchant for propaganda, the cinema seemed also to convey moral values and an ability to shape perception, just as any great work of art can. This epiphany was later a powerful motive in my decision to become an actor. Adding to this, I was very fortunate that around this time a whole new contemporary cinema had come into being. There was the Nouvelle Vague in France, where directors such as Jean-Luc Godard hurled down the gauntlet of the new wave of iconoclastic directors, declaring that a film should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. And startling works appeared from all over Europe. I especially enjoyed Michelangelo Antonioni and his existentialist melancholy that delineated in poetic images the price to be paid for the new post-war secular prosperity and moral shifts. His L'Aventure was for me like being in the audience of the first performance of Le Sacre du Printemps, or, as befitting today's theme, like being in that room when the Lumiere brothers first showed that train steaming into the station. There was even new cinema in staid old conformist Britain that was shaking up and revising old values, especially the old stratification of the class orders. And all these provided a startling new way to look at a changing world. I became a professional actor, hoping against hope that I would one day be given that consummation devoutly to be wished of working in the movies. And that blessed day, to my unbounded delight, came relatively early in my career, in 1966. And it required me to get permission from my then boss, as you've heard, Laurence Olivier, permission to leave his National Theatre Company. Now, Olivier had already enormously influenced me with his assertion that the drama could play the same important role in society as a doctor or psychiatrist, holding the mirror up to nature so that we could see for ourselves what made us tick, what made us human. And he endeared me further by saying, as he wished me good luck and goodbye, by saying that he himself had wanted to stay much, much longer in Hollywood. And I forbore to say that had he done so, he would probably never have made one great film that really influenced me enormously, his Henry V. And we wouldn't be having this conversation. But why had this great classical stage actor wanted to linger longer in the upstart realms of the cinema? Could Shakespeare's shining crown coexist with Chaplin's battered bowler? Well, for one thing, Shakespeare had always been an enormous force in the cinema, and not because of some obligation to genuinely reflect before the cultural shrine, no, because he wrote great stories. And storytelling is, or should be, one of the key elements of cinema. As Plato put it, those who tell the stories also rule. There are auteur theories that claim it's solely the vision and sensibility of the director that is responsible for a movie's success. Others, especially where pixels have replaced prints, who think that it's the special effects that give it a significance. Others that movie stars carry a movie. But unless that once upon a time element is present, the likelihood of popular success is doubtful. At university, I'd studied literature and realized that the great tradition handed down, whether darkly grim Anglo-Saxon epics or lightweight Oscar-Wilde comedies, was centered on arresting the audience's attention, like the ancient mariner, with a powerful tale that simply had to be told. The cinema happily and comfortably inherited this mantle. Moreover, as Thomas Edison insisted, the kinematograph could do for the eye what the phonograph did for the ear. But back to Shakespeare. It was Christopher Isherwood who made the connection between the teeming world of Shakespeare and the film business. He was a friend of mine. In fact, we read the reviews of Cabaret in his house. And I'm happy to say he was complimentary. Yes, reviews and critics. They're another inescapable factor of the film experience. Well, there was a movie once of Eye on the Camera. Do you remember one of the endless antecedents of the musical Cabaret? And it had this simple two-word review: no liker. One of the more gentle reprobations. But incidentally, Isherwood's simple statement, I am a camera, presupposed a whole different kind of reader, those for whom words were no longer paramount. After the invention of photography, and especially its application to the movies, the exposure and capture of images began to assume almost as much importance as words. But I don't think we have time to go into the relevance of critics. I've been told that Richard Schickel handled this admirably on Monday. And my friend, Professor Richard Brown, I was sure do the same thing tomorrow. Now, certainly the success of such universally panned films as The Breakup, which has already earned tens and tens of millions of dollars this summer, would seem to suggest that critical influence now has little effect on the box office, or even an ability to shape culture. People go to the movies because of an unfathomable osmotic instinct allied to word of mouth. As the legendary impresario Sol Hurok remarked, "When people don't want to come, nothing will stop them." Sometimes word of mouth can be propagated on high, as when I played John the Baptist in Franco Zeffirelli's epic Jesus of Nazareth. And the Pope kindly made a speech from his balcony overlooking St. Peter's Square, urging everyone to go home and watch the film on television that evening. Divine. But back to Isherwood. One of my favorite passages in his writing comes from his novel, Prata Violet, where he writes, "The film studio of today is really the palace of the 16th century. There one sees what Shakespeare saw, the absolute power of the tyrant, the courtiers, the flatterers, the jesters, the cunningly ambitious intriguers. There are fantastically beautiful women, there are incompetent favorites, there are great men suddenly disgraced. There is an almost insane extravagance and unexpected parsimony over a few pence. There is enormous splendor, which is sham, and also horrible squalor hidden behind the scenery. There are vast schemes abandoned because of some caprice. There are secrets which everyone knows and no one speaks of. There are even 2 or 3 honest advisors. There are court fools who speak the deepest wisdom in puns, lest they should be taken seriously. They grimace and tear their hair, and privately they weep." Now, my first glimpse into this palace of intrigue was when I played Lucentio in Zeffirelli's version of Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew, made in Rome 40 years ago. The resident prince in this instance was Dino de Laurentiis, a perfect exemplar of the pre-corporate mogul who flew through the airwaves on a gambler's hunch or by the seat of expensively tailored pants. Well, like Sol Hurok and Sam Goldwyn in the US. The fantastically beautiful woman in this case was Elizabeth Taylor, incarnating the role of the shrewish cash prig, while both her screen and real husband was Richard Burton. Both were the height of divadom, chauffeured to work in Rolls Royces, surrounded by courtiers and no doubt flatterers, and occupying the insane extravagance of a suite of dressing rooms carpeted in luxurious white, attended by a retinue of maids and butlers. And it was here, in much more modest circumstances, that I initiated my still ongoing studies of the craft of screen acting, in the Aristotelian way, by doing it. I was playing the young student, Lucentio, and riding into the Padua film set, my appropriate wide-eyed excitement totally unfeigned, as I left behind the familiar world of the theatre and entered the terra incognita of the cinema. I was in the very first shot of the movie at 8 o'clock on the Monday morning. The scene was of myself riding down this street, quoting a big chunk of Shakespeare. There was simply no time to observe how it was done, or to become paralyzingly nervous. Fortunately, there was a wonderful tutor, an old professional on hand, my horse. A far more experienced actor than I was at that point. While I took care of the vocals, my trusty mount took care of the transportation, going patiently and precisely to its marks in the floor, and patiently ignoring all my energetic, amateurish spurrings. This noble beast was an object lesson in unshowy competence, one of the unsung multitude of supporting players who make a starring role possible. The new film medium filled me with the most immediate and profound joy. My rapport with the camera was instantaneous, and to my delight and relief I found it relatively easy to focus my energies on its unwavering, glittering eye. The huge team that serviced the camera seemed hidden in plain sight and was in no way distracting. On the contrary, the crew's intense concentration seemed to bolster my own. And what crews they were. I slowly discovered the jaw-dropping size of the huge army of professionals, not just horses, that made a film possible. From the lowest gopher to the elitist executive. You can see them all listed if you, as we members of the Motion Picture Academy do, whenever we see a screening, we sit through them all, out of respect for our colleagues. And this can add 15 minutes to your evening's entertainment, but it's there. And the list gets longer and longer as the assistants to the assistants to the assistant grows. What surprised me, though, was the amount of coverage that a scene required, especially when several actors were involved. The director usually started by filming a master shot, well, just as if he was a director in a theatre, recording a play from one fixed point. Then the action was broken down into smaller sections, emphasis being made with close-ups and camera moves, and getting the perfect fusion between artistic and technical demands could be, well, astonishingly time-consuming. Today, the use of the go-anywhere portable Steadicam and the changes in the zoom lens, not to mention the intrusion of high-definition tape, have changed the dynamics of this. But the process essentially remains the same. One quickly learned the importance of the optical potential of each lens so that the performance could be adjusted accordingly. In extreme close-ups, it was often sufficiently to merely relax the face and think about what one was saying. At its best, cinema is a compendium of photographed thought. As the great director George Stevens put it, film acting is talking soft and thinking loud. The raised eyebrows on camera could have the same emotional impact as the raised arm on stage. There was a constant need to restrain oneself and not do too much to signal intentions. Much later, when the great Sir John Gielgud became a cherished colleague, he told me an interesting story. He'd been making Chimes at Midnight for Orson Welles and had basically finished his role as the king and was on his way to the airport waiting for his car. And Orson Welles said, "Oh, John, I just have something very quick to pick up, it won't take long." Took him in to the studio, sat him in a chair, put the crown back on his head and costume. He said, "All right, look front, look side, look right, look up, look down. Thank you very much, have a good trip." And he said when the film was cut together, people would come up to him and say, "That shot where you look down at your dead son on the battlefield never has such great acting." So, these are in other words, you, the audience, as Shakespeare wanted you to interpolate as much as we give you. And thank you for that. But it does show how much the audience can interpolate emotion when the actor allows himself to be this passive conduit for them. You know, I've heard of drama schools that teach courses of acting for the camera, and you know, but I think, well, you could teach a course of acting for the lights. Acting, it seems, is acting. However, film technique does require that extension of the modesty of nature that Hamlet requested in his actors, a sort of de-theatricalized naturalness. I remember when Olivier, I don't know if anybody saw this, he did an incredible Othello, extraordinary, scary Othello in the 60s. And I was in his company, and it was spellbinding. And this performance was filmed. Unfortunately, they photographed the stage performance, and often using close-ups. And so, it's just too much. Whereas Frank Finlay, who was his Iago, on the stage was no, you know, competition for Othello. In the movie, when his small, subtle, the looks leap out at you, for me it was an object lesson, and very, very unfair to Olivier not to allow him to readjust his performance to the demands of a film. And of course, we're all haunted by the story of the actor who was requested by, in the old studio days, he was asked to do a role and he didn't want to do it, refused, and they insisted. And he said, all right, then I'll show you. I'm going to walk through this film. And for that performance, he received the Oscar. So, go figure, as they say. But it was my second film, Joseph Losey's Accident, where I really, really started picking up things. Because playing in the film, as my university tutor, was the great British actor Dirk Bogarde, who taught me the value of the lenses, the mysteries of crossing the line. Have you heard of that? It's the thing that bedevils cinema. What side of the camera do you come in? What side do you look? And occasionally, when you get it wrong, you really notice it. And it's usually the continuity person is enormously skillful about this. But it goes back to that old Apollo-Dionysus syndrome that we talked about on stage acting, whereas one half of your brain is doing, I don't know whether it's the left or the right, it's doing highly technical things. It's walking over a sort of railway, it's going into this light, it's coming to this mark, it's picking up a prop, it's doing all kinds of things. The other half of the brain is saying, forget all that, just let the gods speak. So it's a strange thing. Also the script, how important it was to have the whole script in mind, because often you started the film by photographing the last scene. I think I mentioned it, I was reading this morning's paper, and I think it's mentioned there. That is the case. So preparation is really important. You have to prepare the whole arc of your role, so that if you do start at the end, you have a plausible way of playing. It's very rare for a film to be shot sequentially. Accident, by the way, was written by the great Harold Pinter, who, by the way, was the only one, he had a small part in the film, the only one who couldn't get the Pinter pauses right. And later, I actually worked with his wife, Vivian Merchant. We went on and made a film where we had been both promised that there would be major revisions of the script. And they didn't come. So Vivian, to my unbounded admiration, insisted on playing her part as a mute. And got away with it. Oh, actors, well, love them or loathe them. You know, even the geniuses of today's animatronic magic can't quite do without them. They've tried, but I think it's the thing in the eyes. They can't, you know, computerize that. I remember that great screenwriter, John Gregory Dunn, describing a movie he wrote that perhaps unsurprisingly never got made, after constantly rewriting it to placate the demands of first Joanne Woodward, then Natalie Wood, then Faye Dunaway. It metamorphosized from being this hard-hitting saga about a social worker in Detroit and became the genteel story of a college professor's wife who has a midlife crisis of the Ojai Festival. So the screenwriter's lot is really a happy one. Quite apart from the screenplays that never get made, there are all those unread Philistine producers to deal with, not to mention the narcissistic actors who, in the interest of being in the moment, whatever that is, junk the well-chosen words in order to mumble approximate improvisations. I think one danger that the writer, as much as the producer, has to face is the responsibility required to handle historical material. Now, I know that you're all not like, you are readers, but a lot of people tend to get their history from the movies, thereby setting a strange standard, especially when it's distorted in the better interest of the drama. Good Queen Bess never met Mary Queen of Scots, but she does so in the movies, fulfilling an unspoken wish fulfillment on the part of the audience. Captain Bligh of the Bounty was a much maligned man, but the laws of slander and libel don't reach beyond the grave. But the same responsibility must extend to actors who must research their roles diligently so that there's a patina of truth. Burt Lancaster once told me an extraordinary story. He was filming The Leopard for Luchino Visconti in Sicily, I think, and they were in a palace. And they were filming in this room, and by chance, Burt happened to open one of the beautiful wardrobes and armoires and found that they were lined with the most exquisite silk underwear and clothes. And he said, Luchino, what's the point of all this? You're not going to see it. And Visconti said, it's important to know that it's there. You're the prince. And maybe that explains why Visconti's films have that extra texture. But back to the narrative. I was voted a top star of tomorrow by an American trade paper. But the fact that this august honor came with a demand for money to advertise this status, well, it was something I would have to get used to in this newfound land where I now happily have my home. Fame and fortune are often interrelated and frequently synonymous. I went to Hollywood and added my name to the long list of contract artists just before that whole system was abandoned and changed radically. Coming from Britain, it surprised me this artistic apartheid that operated. It was like a really bad party that wasn't working. Because the film actors were in one corner, the TV actors in another, television, well, the radio actors hadn't been invited, and there was no crossover, whereas in Britain we did everything, under the theory that the one discipline animated the other. So I've never really been over-concerned about the size of the screen on which a film eventually plays, despite the outrageous assertion that television is a medium because it's neither rare or well done. That calls for a drink. In Hollywood, I worked, or more precisely, subjected myself to the great dictatorial maestro, George Cukor, who much later became a friendly little neighbor. His invariable direction was at a clip, very useful one, especially in these days of navel-gazing indulgence. The experience, however, was not a happy one for me, and neither were the results. Even though I was working with an established Hollywood master, I realized too late that one's own ideas and instincts were not impertinent presumption, but a valid, nay, necessary contribution to the process. I learned much later the infallible way of having one's own way in a scene was to say to the director, think of the idea that you wanted, and say to the director, you know, I love your idea about so-and-so. And believe me, it works like a charm. I gained further in experience and confidence. And there was that moment one learned to anticipate with joy. That was the moment when the character, having been formulated, started playing you. There were things that you worked out in the script beforehand that no longer applied, because the character had its own logic. That's always truly, truly exciting. But all this is something that couldn't be taught, because each individual case was different. In a scene between one or more characters, where each was filmed individually, it was essential to play off-camera as intensely as one did on-camera. The deservedly legendary James Stewart used to insist in coming in on his days off, even on putting on costume for his off-camera lines. And this generosity extended to his audiences. He once reminded me, as we rode to some Hollywood function together, that they should be partners, not customers. I had the good fortune to work with other great actors and film legends, such as David Niven. He impressed me not only with his endless, inimitable stories, but with his criteria for accepting a role. In no particular order, they were where, who with, how much. And illustrating the efficacy of the maxim that less is more, he would ruthlessly blue pencil the script, decimating it until he could make that observation. Yeah, well, that's quite enough for me to say. I met the great John Wayne on location and took to heart his dictum: speak low, speak slow, and don't say too much. In Murder on the Orient Express, I immersed myself in a cornucopia of stars, and actually rather admired Richard Widmark's honesty, who said he'd only signed on to do the movie to meet the stars. I tell you, it was quite thrilling to be in the makeup, getting your hair frizzed next to Ingrid Bergman. But whenever it was allowed, and not all directors do allow this, one had to be objective about seeing dailies or rushes, the results of the previous day's work. We were discussing this on the radio, in fact, this morning, because it could sometimes be a dreadfully humiliating experience to see this crude work before the editor waved his magic scissors and miraculously everything was cut to the optimum. In The Three Musketeers, for example, Richard Lester, the director, will refuse to see rushes or dailies because he saw the limitations of what had been done and not the achievements. Whereas Bob Fosse, the director of Cabaret, would insist on it. We would film scenes, he would take suggestions from his actors, from anyone, and we'd go it was actually during lunchtime, a much better way of using the time, to see the dailies. And he'd say, look, you see that's not working because of so-and-so. Or on those really red letter days, he'd say, your version, your idea is better. And he'd take it. which was so wonderfully empowering. It made one feel so creative and not just someone jumping through a hoop at someone's command. But Fosse and Cabaret exemplified the endless struggle between the suits and the talent. It goes on, I couldn't believe it. Taschen, the publisher, invited us to dinner the other day. The people who were involved in Cabaret, the assistant director, Joel Gray came, myself came, and all the creative forces sat on this, well, all the producers who still remained were on the other side of the table. And we were astonished. They were still angry at what Fosse had put them through. This is the man who earned them 8 Oscars. Whereas on our side of the table, we just glowed with the pleasure of working for a man who just wouldn't stop until he got something extra and special. But, you know, the commercial underpinning of a film, the producers, all those suits in the executive office is necessary. You know, because when you think of it, the budget for promoting a film, for example, is almost the same as for making it. And more so now. We're into a different era where, you know, the commercial selling of the film is paramount. And significantly, close to the producer's credit, is that of the casting director. Have you noticed? Look for it. It's 3rd position. There's a reason for this. I mean, François Truffaut said that the success of the film is due 90% to good casting. And it is a very, very important job. Often, though, casting against type is interesting. I think of the extraordinary performance of, well, so many extraordinary performances that I won't, I know we're, oh, yes, no, we should press on. I promised anecdotes in the paper today and I've got to live up to it. I even, you know, I played myself once. Good casting, I thought. In Billy Wilder's Fedora, and had the responsibility of actually someone committing suicide because of me. You know, tell that one to your psychiatrist. But Billy was this extraordinary, magical person. He said, you know, he said nobody says, boy, I must see that movie. I hear it came in under budget. He worked on the commandment, thou shalt not bore. And as a result, produced this remarkable body of work. The rewards can be enormous of this business. I remember flying to India, to the Delhi Film Festival, sitting at the back, and they were playing the Three Musketeers in first class. And the steward coming up to me very concerned, saying, I don't think it's appropriate that you're sitting back here watching your movie. You must come up front. I didn't demur or move back. But I had this good fortune to work all over the world, in India, France, Australia, Spain, Japan, Brazil, nearly every country locked behind the former Iron Curtain, because they knew what they were doing, making movies, and it was cheap. I've been caught up in wars and natural disasters. I've also been to film festivals all the way over the world, from Kazakhstan to Cairo. And the great thing is that both filming these countries and being there as a, you know, on a festival jury, you're not there as a tourist. You're working with the natives. You're getting, you know, an insight that other people don't have. And filmmaking, to get that maximum bang for the buck, is now moving inexorably eastward. We now find ourselves filming in Romania and Bulgaria. Where will it end, I wonder? Afghanistan, perhaps. I'm often asked if I have a favorite film, and I reply that it's a difficult question to answer. Some films are artistic successes and are gratefully remembered for that reason. Others fall by the wayside and yet are intensely memorable for the location where one made it or the people one met. And each film experience deepens the patina of one's career. Recently, I was in Russia making this movie. It was the biggest independent movie ever made in Russia at that time. There's a whole reviving cinema, and it was fascinating to be behind the scenes, to be on location in Moscow, and to see the extraordinary changes that were happening there. Also, some of the things that were happening that one didn't quite altogether approve of, like the muzzling of the press, just like the good old bad days. And this, on the one side, this dazzling, this obscene wealth, and then seeing pensioners on Red Square, where their pensions didn't mean anything, having to beg. It was very, very disturbing. But cinema is reviving in Russia. They now have a successful home box office. They're no longer making imitation Hollywood films. It's very good news. But a reminder of the good old bad days, I was just checking into the airport in LaGuardia yesterday afternoon, and the sky cap was Russian. He said, "I know you." He said, "At school, we went to see The Three Musketeers, because you know why? That film is politically correct. It was approved by the Politburo, because it's totally devoid of socialist criticism." So there we are. We glimpsed at future societies with Logan's Run. And, you know, all of us here, we all know it. We're all experts in the movies because film is a very common experience. Everyone has an opinion, as the blogosphere will testify. This common denominator makes them very meaningful to us and current, important. One comes across many theories. And the only problem with theories, you may have heard a few in this arena this week, is whether it's about the evolving gangster film as a measure of American imperialism, or the bizarre women's hairstyles in Star Wars as an indication of future sexual mores, is that they're so open to misinterpretation. I remember filming Accident. They wanted a shot of the credits, so Joe Losey just filmed this house. It was a simple shot, the house in which we were filming. He needed, how long did I say, 15 minutes for the credits? So this one shot, we just sat there. Suddenly, the owner's dog runs down to the house, into the shot. But anyway, he was filming under the gun. He didn't have, he was under pressure to finish. So he didn't reshoot it. So I have read in the most learned film magazines the significance of the dog. I've been told when public speaking, I think it was that other great Anglo-American, Alistair Cook, who gave the invaluable advice to always try to focus on one person in the audience. So for that one person who may possibly have thought about how we ply our bizarre trade, or may even have considered it as a career, I give this advice. The best advice one can give is that given to me when I was starting out, that it's vital to believe in one's ability to succeed absolutely and unequivocally. As an actor, you inevitably encounter so much negativity and rejection, so that without this solid core of self-belief, it's very easy to fall prey to paralyzing insecurity and self-doubt. Accordingly, it's essential to build up this network of gut instincts that by listening and obeying them will guide you through the minefield of a career. it's worth remembering that the actor's job is unlike most others, where there's usually a steady linear progression upward from mailroom to boardroom, along a clearly demarcated track. Jobbing from one engagement to the next, the actor enjoys no such predictability or security. You have to hack your way through your own individual jungle, and sometimes the thickets and swamps become impenetrable and they get uncomfortably bogged down, while for others, the sunlit uplands and clearings abound. Some may get their big break early, while others have to wait a patient lifetime for it, and for no rational reason. An unemployed actor is that contradiction in terms, just like a peacetime soldier is. It's also a fiction that the term resting, used in Britain at least to indicate the occasional inevitable cessation of gainful employment. Finding and realizing career opportunities is a full-time occupation in itself. And yet work, it has been maddeningly observed, begets work. Perfect catch-22. But it has been said, if you want to hear an actor complain, give him a job. But every venture begins with optimism. Francois Truffaut, in his delightful film, That Valentine to His Profession, Day for Night, compared it to starting out on a journey where you embarked with great enthusiasm, looking forward to the views ahead and to the company, but toward the end, after the roadblocks and the detours and the hold-ups and the potholes, one just hoped to arrive in one piece. My own approach is to give whatever, 100% of what I can give, and after that one can walk away with it, at least with the old Boy Scout saying, I did my best. And as it has been said, if it doesn't work out, it's experience, and if it does, serendipity. But, Ruth Gordon remarked very sagely that you have to have a talent for having talent. And someone else said, talent is your gift from God, but what you do with it is your gift to God. And another comforting truism is that nobody owns that shining key to success. The goalposts are constantly being moved. And nothing is for sure, allowing Kipling's two impostors, triumph and disaster, a fairly level playing field on which to fight it out. Another golden rule of Hollywood, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is propounded by the screenwriter William Goldman. Nobody knows anything. As Francis Bacon put it, if we begin with certainty, we shall end in doubts. But if we begin with doubts and are patient with them, we shall end in certainties, so that the arena is leveled at every entry of the players. Now, granted that Hollywood is still composed of that time-honored mixture of peddlers and poets, change is the only constant factor. What I say today may not apply tomorrow. Look how the audience of tomorrow, young people, are turning their backs on the movie, and embracing the media that makes sense in their increasingly electronic world, headquartered in their computers and cell phones. The other day I read in Variety, our showbiz Bible, but increasingly taking on the tones of the apocalypse, about a studio head who was heard to murmur wistfully, if only I could make a movie that I myself would like to see. Pity him and his colleagues who now work in an environment where the tail of marketing now firmly wags the undernourished dog of creativity, so that only safe and tried and tested products reach the market. Of course, all this flies in the face of that other immutable rule of business, that without risk, there is no reward. A showdown is imminent, thank goodness. And meanwhile, the burgeoning success of the independent movies is evident not only in the fact that they're winning all the Oscars, but the studios themselves are trying to buy them up, left, right, and center. I know that I must leave time for the Q&A. So we're in this situation now where films are all things to all people. My friend, the screenwriter Nicholas Meyer, once thought of a film that was guaranteed to appeal to everyone in America. It was called Abraham Lincoln's Doctor's Boy's Dog. I'm afraid that's what we're getting today. I'm afraid a lot of you, probably like me, are staying away or going to the independents. It's a strange syndrome. Hugh Wheeler called it the Ophelia syndrome. Thought and affliction, passion, hell itself, she turns to favor and to prettiness. But, you know, I should cut to the chase. I was doing this last time, I remember. You can sit in your room and go through this, and it goes through in half an hour, and you think, oh my goodness, what can I... But I forget that, you know, most careers go in and out of fashion. You're hot, then you're not. You're discovered, and then you're... But luck plays a part, of course. But let's get back to that question before we finish. Is any of this important? Well, certainly not every job will be significant. Often work can be repetitive and tedious, and the hours are getting longer and longer. Much of it's entertainment, and this can be important in itself as the world becomes more stressed and complex. But the most enduring films seem to have that other E besides entertainment. They enlighten, they educate. Entertainment essentially reinforces what you already know, but education breaks through those limitations. Occasionally you can find yourself involved in something that actually changes the way people perceive the world. And I think of the past, Tom Hanks bringing such sympathetic awareness to the AIDS crisis in Philadelphia. And today, Al Gore, I hear he was here, that remarkable film, yes. Using film to remind the present day audience of the chilling threat of global warming. And recently I worked with that fine actress and humanitarian Anna Devere Smith, who posed the question perfectly. Do you want to be an artist so the whole world will look at you, or do you want to be an artist because you want to use your ability to make the world see itself differently through you? And that's the key. I remember glimpsing this potential when I first worked in the theatre, playing in a remarkable play called Bent, a Holocaust drama. And at the stage door one night, there was a young girl. She said, could I just want to say that my mother was at the performance tonight, and she was in a camp. She went through the experience that some of the characters described, and I went cold. I thought, what is she going to tell me? How dare you, a well-fed, well-paid actor, patronize, to live all these experiences? No, she said, I just want to thank you. She's never been able to speak about it before, but seeing this play has somehow enabled it to come out, pointing, in a way, right back to the religious, historical origins of the drama. And if I never do anything else, I shall never forget that moment. And later I was able to play Martin Gray, another Holocaust survivor, who, in an extraordinary film called For Those I Love, Au Nom de Tous les Miens, about this man who cheated the odds, came back, had a new life for himself in France with a beautiful wife and children, all destroyed by a forest fire, who recreated his life. And I remember, filming one wintry day in the Umschlagplatz, where the children were taken off and seeing not one person able to watch this scene without tears pouring from their eyes. And even on this set in Budapest, a Canadian tourist entering the set and who had been in a concentration camp suddenly thought he was back. And this man's distress was incredibly moving. And you realize suddenly that there is a point to this. Martin Gray's message. I have a message. I need to deliver it. It's very simple. No matter what happens, you must go beyond. You must not give up. One can rebuild, even on ruins. Life can go on, no matter what happens. I used to go back to France a lot, and the customs officer would always signal me to come over, and I'd have that heart-sinking, guilty feeling. And he'd say, bonjour, monsieur l'acteur. And he'd want to talk about the film that he'd seen on television. That was when it suddenly made sense. So what these films have in common is a true role model. I'm not talking about role models like Mel Gibson. We all know that isolated from the spotlight and from the script, we all have feet of clay, potentially. But humanity can be seen in all its paradoxical attitudes as an object as much of admiration as ridicule. But if our function as actors, as communicators and interpreters is properly fulfilled, if we can move and enchant and inspire as an object of compassion too,